This is Grey Merchant of Magic, and I really like Hellboy. So I'm going to rank all 5 Hellboy movies, from my least to most favorite. Spoiler warning for all of them, and to a lesser extent the comics. Likes are appreciated. Hellboy 2019. This is not a good movie. I know there's a subset of Hellboy fans who argue this one is superior to the earlier two because it's more accurate to the comics, and I have 2 responses to that. Firstly, when it comes to adaptations, I consider faithfulness to the source material to be independent of overall quality. Secondly, I don't think it's all that faithful anyway. To expand on the first point, as another example, the film adaptation of Snowpiercer takes little from the graphic novel it's based on beyond the basic premise. The characters and specifics of the plot are all different. It's not a particularly accurate adaptation, but I prefer it to the original. I think it's better crafted and more engaging than its source material. I don't think Hellboy 2019 should be considered better just for being supposedly more faithful, when it has a multitude of issues as a movie, which I'll get into later. And again, I don't think it's very faithful. I see why people might think it is. It has more Easter eggs than the prior series, and it includes certain cool details, like the BPRD headquarters, but the actual meat, the tone and style and character personalities are fundamentally different. And as I said, I don't think radical changes from the source material automatically invalidates a movie, but I don't think they work here. My biggest problem with Hellboy 2019, from which many of my critiques stem, is the tone. HBO Max describes the movie as a gritty reboot, and that's not wrong. Within 5 seconds of the movie starting, we get swearing and gore. Almost every decision made is in service of being gritty and dark and mature, but it's a 14-year-old's perception of gritty and dark and mature. This movie loves to swear, but it doesn't swear like an adult. It swears like a middle schooler who just discovered what swearing is. It's all forced and awkward. The gore that the movie also loves is largely the same. There's a lot of gross-out humor and just general purposeless grossness. It's mature in the sense that extreme 90s comics were mature, which is to say, entirely immature but in denial. I think the Hellboy comic, despite launching in the 90s, avoided the more regrettable trends of its time. It was oriented towards adults and older teenagers, not because it was full of swearing and guts and edginess, but because it's deep and surreal and ambitious and literary and historical. Put simply, the Hellboy comic is actually mature, not whatever this is. Now, the BPRD spin-off comic is tonally quite different from its originator. If Hellboy is a fairy tale, BPRD is a war movie. I think that's valid and enjoyable too. Hellboy 2019 doesn't capture that either though. It attempts to be both surreal and mythological and gritty and real at the same time, and it fails immensely at both. Also, likely in the same misplaced quest for grittiness, everyone is a massive, entirely unlikable jerk. Hellboy's a jerk, Broom's a jerk, Daimyo's a jerk, the unmade sequels Abe Sapien would have been a jerk, Alice is, okay, she's not a jerk, but she's sarcastic to an impractical level, so I'm throwing her in. And the jerkness isn't in service of anything except alternating cheap attempts at laughs and drama, and eventually entirely unearned emotional resolutions. No one acts like an experienced combatant, much less a functional adult. I can't take them or their problems seriously when they all act like surly teenagers. It also results in them largely having indistinguishable voices. There's no contrast, no straight men or actual foils to facilitate interesting character interactions, just 2 hours of whining and backtalk. And as much as I tried to evaluate adaptations in a vacuum, I really dislike these versions of Hellboy and Professor Broom. Man-Child Hellboy is probably my least favorite element of the earlier films, and this one doubles down on that characterization hard. He literally screams, "You're not my real dad," at one point. He's also an idiot. He spent decades fighting evil, but he has to be reminded that evil is evil. Meanwhile, I feel antagonistic, deadbeat dad Broom misses the point of the character. The comic Hellboy is the ultimate example of nurture beating nature. The Nazi-summoned demon spawn grows up to be a hero because of the supportive environment he was raised in. So what's the point if you make that environment deeply unpleasant? I don't blame any of the actors. David Harbour can demonstrably capture comic Hellboy's tired, annoyed, blue-collar energy very well. It's not his fault they had him inexplicably act like a teenager and yell a whole bunch.
I know you.
I'm glad Hollywood eventually found a successful superhero role for him. The total problems are further contributed to by very dissonant and mostly unfunny attempts at humor that undermine the attempted grittiness. Hellboy keeps quipping to no one. Alice does this weird, forced, overly casual, never gonna give you a straight answer whimsy stick in her first scene and then immediately drops it. There's an out-of-place semi-fourth wall break.
Then we make sure she doesn't come back for the sequel.
The movie opens with
King Arthur. Yes, that King Arthur.
as if we'd be impressed by a public domain character appearing in this work of fiction. He's been in so many things. You reference one of them later.
Looks bigger in the cartoon.
It also ends with a literal, "so that just happened" style joke that everyone's been making fun of lately.
All right, that happened.
I thought this joke was okay though.
And they've requested your assistance with a giant problem. Yeah? What's that? Giants.
Hellboy 2019 also has terrible pacing issues. It apparently had major behind-the-scenes problems, but also seems like it was just trying to do too much from the beginning. Both of these factors are apparent throughout the project. For some reason, perhaps to distinguish it from the previous movies, 2019 is mainly an adaptation of a story that serves as either the penultimate or final main Hellboy comic arc, depending on how you define things. Turning a finale into an origin story leaves the endeavor feeling rushed, overstuffed, and confused. Important characters are constantly being thrown in without enough context. Instead of organically showing Hellboy's initial interactions with them, we mostly have to take the movie's word that they met in the past and it was important. The film also acts like Hellboy and Alice have this pre-existing back and forth when they literally met once, briefly, almost 30 years ago, when she was a baby. All this is further exasperated by poor editing and the occasional feeling that entire important scenes are missing. And they probably realized how rushed and misshapen this thing is because they do not trust the audience to figure things out by themselves at all.
No mortal weapon can harm me. Excalibur. This is no mortal weapon. This lady had
The psychic you were telling us about.
The movie also just looks bad a lot of the time. Even ignoring inflation, the movie had a lower budget than its predecessors, and that's noticeable. The CGI is often comparable to the 2004 version, despite 15 years of technological advancement. The gratuitousness of the gore is not helped by the fact that it looks very fake most of the time. The ending is anticlimactic and weirdly small. I can't decide if I just dislike this Hellboy's visual design, or if something's wrong effects-wise, or both. The right hand of doom just doesn't look right to me, and attempting to translate the yellow eyes into live action just makes them look jaundiced. I also get the sense that many decisions in this movie weren't made because the creators thought they would be good, they were made simply to be different from the previous version. Broom isn't younger looking and a jerk because they had any sort of compelling arc in mind. He's younger looking and a jerk because he was old and nice in the first version. The fact that they initially cast a white guy as Daimyo makes me think that they didn't include him because they had a deep understanding of his character and potential. They merely threw him in so as not to immediately do Abe and Liz again. Hellboy looks and dresses gross because he looked more appealing last time.
I'll always look this good.
If only. It's rated R to be different, not because the story needed it to be. Before I move on, I do want to note the things that I liked about the movie. I think utilizing Hellboy in Mexico, one of the sadder Hellboy stories, as a springboard to Hellboy second-guessing himself and his place in the world has potential. There is some similarity to the context of him quitting the BPRD in the comics. The demons that attack London have cool Eldrazi-ish designs. Lastly, for such a brief scene, they recreated all the Nazi nerds from Hellboy's origin well. This next placement is going to make people mad. Hellboy 2004. Also, if my voice sounds shot, it's because I went to a Killers concert last night and screamed a bunch. I'm not going to apologize. I need to stress that I like the top 4 films of this list. The gap between this and the last one is large. I like more of this movie than I don't. I'm a fan of most of the characters. Ron Perlman is beloved as Hellboy for a reason. The visual design, prosthetics, and performance all come together really well. He's not the comic character, but he's still a good character. I admit that I find the character's immaturity grating at times, but Perlman infuses him with enough heart to make him more likable than he would be otherwise, though it takes a bit too long to get concrete proof that he cares about humanity. Abe Sapien is also an effects marvel, and Doug Jones and David Hyde Pierce provide a great tandem performance. I always enjoy him getting water-based diversions, which also happens in the comics a lot. It's odd that he's just not in the final third of the movie, though. John Hurt is a wonderful Professor Broom, giving the character enough warmth that you really feel his death. I'm glad that he has a greater presence than in Seed of Destruction, where he dies very quickly. Rupert Evans' John Myers is unfortunately a boring blank slate of a character. There's probably a reason John didn't come back in the sequel. I get that the Hellboy franchise is weird, and that general audiences might need a viewpoint character to get introduced to the world through, but can't we get one with a personality? Maybe a comic character like Kate Corrigan or Sidney Leach, someone interesting with skills beyond generic FBI stuff. I also don't love a lot of decisions made with Selma Blair's Liz Sherman, which I don't blame her for. She just isn't given very much to do. She gets the old, use your powers. I don't want to use my powers. Okay, but have you considered using your powers? Okay, I will use my powers. Arc. And the love triangle is weird. I'm sure part of my dislike comes from it not being a thing in the comics, but I also think it's just not handled that well. John is a charisma vacuum, and Hellboy's a creep, so it's just not fun to watch. Why was stalking so big in movies of the 2000s? Also, her performance is just kind of muted here, which isn't the case in the sequel or animated films, which makes you think it was something she was directed to do. The villains are fun and hammy. Rasputin has a lot more personality than Nimu, and his minions are less annoying than Gurgak. I like how Rasputin and Broom have a dad-off, and I'm fascinated by Crowin's little clockwork speedwalk. Tom Manning is probably in this too much. Hellboy 2004 shows its age in some ways. The CGI is almost 20 years old, and you can tell sometimes, though I've seen worse. Generally, the film mixes computer and practical effects well. Samael mostly looks good. There are a few shots of him standing up where the man in a suit is very obvious, but I like his design. The cinematography also manages to capture the feel of the comics at times. The influence of popular media of the day is apparent in various ways. There's a lot of black leather like a certain other early 2000s comic film franchise. The BPRD go from being an independent organization in the comics to a subset of the FBI, and I can't help but be reminded of X-Files. But the most obvious influence is Men in Black. A normal law enforcement officer gets whisked into a secret government agency full of weirdos and craziness. Except John is incredibly boring, so it's Men in Black if one of the guys who isn't Jay got the job instead. Some of the attempts at cool lines also feel of the time, and like the reboot, the dialogue can be on the nose. And finally, some miscellaneous observations. I'm not really a fan of the BPRD and Hellboy being forced into secrecy. I enjoy that the comic world is mostly like ours, except supernatural happenings are just common enough that people know who to call when they happen, and Hellboy is readily accepted. But I also understand the desire to raise the stakes and make the world more normal. Changing Hellboy's origin so that Broom and the soldiers are present during the summoning raises the question of why they wait until it's almost over to try and stop it. The soundtrack is good, and the film's cover of Red Right Hand is my favorite version of that song. Hellboy's eye wound really feels like foreshadowing, but unless the production team got very advanced info from Mignola, I guess it's just a coincidence. The comic is a fun reference, but put in a Craig Saffé in a movie for real, you cowards. The first time I watched this movie, I interpreted this line as stating that Hellboy ate cats.
He gets fed 6 times a day. He's got a thing for cats.
I can't be alone on that. Hellboy, Sword of Storms. This and Hellboy 2004 were very close. Before I rewatched all the movies, I assumed they'd be switched from how they ended up turning out. This one is just a little dull at times, but my various minor problems with 2004 added up to ultimately make me slightly prefer this one. First off, let me explain what the deal is with the animated films, in case you're unfamiliar. They're semi-spin-offs of the 2004 film, retaining the soundtrack and most of the cast, but taking place in a separate continuity closer to the comics. I think it works. As stated, I like 2004's cast and soundtrack. Blair sounds much better, and Jones gets his first chance to actually voice Abe. I also appreciate the more comic-faithful depictions of the characters and their relationships. Hellboy and Liz aren't dating, they have much more of a sibling vibe that works a lot better for me. Liz has more personality, and her arc, while very similar to her arc in 2004, is better handled. Hellboy is also a lot more likable. He's gruff, but he's not whiny. They get his speaking style down very well. Abe is given more to do, including water-based diversions, but also other stuff. We're also introduced to Kate, who I'm a big fan of. In general, this version of the BPRD and its agents feel a lot more established.
So he's not on the planet.
This has happened before?
There was the Marrakesh thing.
Do you really think it's something like that?
How about Prague? Bombay, March 1993.
Istanbul, 89.
I bet that these characters have been doing this for years to a greater extent than with the live-action movies. It's not the highest budget animated film ever made. It does open with Papyrus font. There's also a point where someone says that Hellboy looks awful and his character model is literally unchanged. But the movie doesn't look cheap either. Generally, the cinematography is actually pretty ambitious. In terms of miscellaneous observations, 2/5 of the Hellboy movies open with him fighting a big bat monster. Also, it's cool that the movie recreates the short story heads pretty much unchanged, while also organically working it into a larger, more structured story. That's pretty much all I have to say about this one, which does speak to it not being the most complex or exciting film ever made, but it's enjoyable. It has a good sense of rising stakes, and mines mythology and folklore well. There are definitely worse ways to spend a little over an hour. Hellboy 2, The Golden Army. That's right, I don't think this is the best Hellboy movie. How's that for a hot take on a film franchise that no one else cares about? It's second, so clearly I still like it though. It's weird. It doesn't change most of what I didn't like about its predecessor, it even doubles down on certain elements, but does enough better in terms of scope, story, and writing that I found it to be a notably stronger film overall. As to what it fixes from the first one, Abe has way more presence, which I like. Jones does a great job both playing and voicing him, especially with the added emotional scenes he gets this time around. I also prefer his more stripped-down appearance. John is gone, and the replacement new character, Johann Kraus, has a much more interesting personality and power set. The effects still aren't as advanced as today's, obviously, but there is a noticeable improvement. There are also trends from the first one that I was neutral towards that continue. For example, this one is even more Men in Black-esque, especially in this one scene. In terms of reappearing things I don't care for, Tom Manning is in this even more than last time, and his competency undergoes severe flanderization. There's also a lot of Hellboy-Liz relationship stuff in this. I already wasn't into it, but it's especially melodramatic and nonsensical here. And I'm just going to say it, they're a toxic couple. It's 90% Hellboy's fault because he's a big hell baby, but both of them have a lot of work to do in therapy. I have a fondness for Can't Smile Without You, and I really love the scene, but that is a very codependent song to make the theme of your relationship. Those twins are going to grow up maladjusted. Of the two love stories in this movie, I'm a lot more compelled by Ave and Nuala, whose story I actually find quite sweet. And I feel it really must be reiterated how immature Hellboy can be in this. He's very much a Hellboy, not a Hellman. He has a very exaggerated version of demon are from Mars, women are from Venus. That's difficult to get invested in because he has such a lack of awareness. The movie also undoes a lot of his character growth from 2004. He ends that movie having matured and made peace with John and Tom, but in this, we learn that he got John reassigned, and he's constantly undermining Tom, then goes through largely the same arc with Johann. Of all the Hellboy movies, this one feels the largest in scope. It convincingly includes an unending army and a massive abandoned city. I'd be unsurprised if this is why Guillermo del Toro was initially chosen for the Hobbit films. And speaking of del Toro, this one feels like he had a greater ability to go all out on weird creature designs, which I enjoy. I like all the little things that make the elves inhuman. I like how they become more nature-esque as they age, turn to stone when they die, and have water for blood. I also enjoy the designs of the animated portion of the intro. Plus, bringing back John Hurt and pairing him with young Hellboy is very wholesome. Somewhat related to the Del Toro-ness of the movie, I've heard the complaint that this deviates too much from the source material, and I would say that criticism is overstated. While it is true that's the only Hellboy film to have a wholly original main plot, I don't think said plot is un-Hellboy. Thematically, it's very cohesive. The conflict between man and the magical world comes up in the comics all the time. Here's a short segment called Things That Happen in This Hellboy Movie and also other Hellboy movies. This is the second consecutive Hellboy movie to have Hellboy fight a guy with a chain hand. Did one of them copy the other? Every live-action Hellboy movie involves the villain really casually walking into the BPRD and either killing or capturing an ally, but it's especially egregious here due to how similar it is to the previous film. And while in this section, literally every movie in this franchise involves Hellboy learning to accept an agent that he initially gets annoyed by to varying degrees of prominence. For miscellaneous observations, what is the point of this death wall? If the goblins made the Golden Army, I feel like they should get a third of the crown.
So he called a truce and divided the crown in 3 pieces, 1 for the humans and 2 for himself.
Finally, let me know if you can figure out the subtle symbolism occurring in this scene. Hellboy, Blood and Iron. I think this movie is great. Everything I liked about Sword Up Storms applies here, and everything I didn't like is fixed. Of all the Hellboy movies, I consider this both the best and most enjoyable generally, and by far the most successful at capturing the tone and style of the source material. Compared to its predecessor, the lighting is much improved, leading to a more atmospheric experience. As it goes on, the shading gets closer and closer to that of the comic, until it hits the climax, which looks almost indistinguishable at points. The atmosphere is contributed to by this movie being the best at capturing the tonal balance of the comics. At various points, it's emotional, scary, funny, and action-packed, all without any element undercutting the other. And when I say scary, I'm not exaggerating. Don't troll kid this. There's some legitimately dark content, but unlike 2019, it never feels gratuitous or like it's trying to be edgy. It's all in service of the story. This is the most mature Hellboy movie. And it might also be the funniest. This is my personal favorite comedic moment.
This is crap.
Very relatable. The average donut is like a 5 out of 10, and yet I've had a lot of donuts in my life. Also, if I had an hour and 16 minutes to tell a pretty dense, ambitious story, I'm not sure I'd spend quite so much of it making fun of a Donald Trump stand-in.
An old house in the Hamptons has just been purchased by Oliver Trumbold.
Trumbold? The hotel and casino guy?
Yes, he wants to open it as a resort, and says it's haunted.
Oh, God. Can you say publicity stunt?
But I'm not complaining. Magic wolves end up draining all his blood, by the way. One of the highlights of the movie is Professor Broom, who has a bigger presence in this one than any other. And he doesn't die. I've always thought that he was kind of wasted in his first comic appearance, and based on how many prequel stories he's appeared in, I wonder if Mignola and the other writers agree. The other characters are also great, retaining their strong characterizations from the previous movie. It's the best version of Hellboy grappling with his original nature that I've seen on screen. What this film gets more than the others is that rejecting his supposed destiny is not actually a hard decision for him. He's mostly just annoyed at all the people who keep bringing it up. We get a version of Liz who isn't racked with self-doubt, like in 2004, or Sort of Storms, or saddled to a terrible boyfriend, like in The Golden Army. Abe lampshades his water-based diversions.
Ogopogo has been sighted again in Lake Okanagan. This time it's evidently flipped a couple of houseboats.
Think I'm being typecast?
Aren't we all?
Also, Sidney Leach, the human metal detector, is in this, and I have an arbitrary fondness for him. I was always disappointed that he disappeared in the comics without explanation. I guess it's for the best that he avoided Hell on Earth, though. He's too pure for the Frogman apocalypse. All the villains are enjoyable, and they escalate in a satisfying manner. The movie starts with Hellboy fighting a cyborg minotaur in a sewer, and it ends with him fighting a god in a dead billionaire's mansion. And if that isn't the distilled Hellboy experience, I don't know what is. This is one of my favorite lines from the comics, and it's cool that it got included here.
Lady, I was gonna cut you some slack, because you're a major mythological figure. That's crazy talk.
Now leave me alone.
Given the channel this video is on, it bears mention how similar Erzbet is to Leona Vess in both appearance and character motivation. For my first random observation, in this movie, Hellboy gets burnt. He's explicitly fireproof in the 2004 continuity.
I'm fireproof. You're not.
And I guess I always assumed he was in the comics, but maybe I made that up. Wait, was he joking when he reacted to heat in the first movie? Also, this one ghost has Princess Leia hair. Strong finisher. I know. There we go. All 5 Hellboy movies ranked. Should I have also included the Iron Shoes short featured on the DVD of Blood and Iron, or the unsuccessful Amazing Squirrel Head pilot episode? No, because those aren't movies, and this thing is long enough. What's your favorite Hellboy movie? What would you like to see in a new Hellboy movie? Commenting greatly helps, as does liking, sharing, subscribing, and supporting me on Patreon. Big thanks to my current patrons. If you like this, let me know, and I'd love to do a video ranking Hellboy's video game appearances one day.